Well, hello and welcome. We continue today with our exploration into the Bible book of Revelation. Today we are at the end of chapter 18 and we're looking at verses 21 to 24. This is what they say. Then a mighty angel picked up a boulder the size of a large millstone and threw it into the sea and said, "With such violence the great city of Babylon will be thrown down, never to be found again. The music of the harpists and musicians, pipers and trumpeters will never be heard in you again. No worker of any trade will ever be found in you again. The sound of a millstone will never be heard in you again. The light of a lamp will never shine in you again. The voice of bridegroom and bride will never be heard in you again. Your merchants were the world's important people. By your magic spell, all the nations were led astray. In her was found the blood of the prophets and of God's holy people, of all who have been slaughtered on the earth." So throughout chapter 18 we've been told of the judgment on Babylon, the great city, a reference to Rome for John's original readers, but for us today a reference to any empire, city, culture, country that builds its wealth on the back of excess and violence and exploitation. What this looks like from the world is, of course, fame and glory and riches and status and power, at least to those who are benefiting from the wealth that's been created. And it's easy to get caught up with such economic wealth. The way of life that this appears to offer is the easy life, full of the best prospects, the richest foods, the spectacular architecture, the excellent culture, the access to power, the best education, the deepest financial profits. When John initially looked at this city, he himself was astonished back in chapter 17. But as ever in Revelation, as with Jesus' teaching in the Gospels, this is not the full picture. In fact, such excess and exploitation brings the just and righteous judgment of God. And in this last section of chapter 18, a mighty angel throws a boulder into the sea as a kind of picture parable, saying that in this way Babylon and all who come after her who are like her in her exploitation and her violence will be thrown down in judgment, never to be found again, as verse 21 says in our reading. Then that picture is expanded as the angel explains what that judgment will look like. No more music or song, no more joy and celebration, no more work or trade, no more making money, no more producing the fine foods, no more status, no more power. The merchants were the world's important people, says verse 23, says no more of that. No more light, everything will be dead, dark, desolate. The dark side of such excess that resulted from the exploitation is the reason for the judgment. Refusing, therefore, to worship God and his Messiah, they instead worshipped the beast who was manifested in this sinful and evil human culture. The dark side is the blood of the prophets and God's holy people, a reference to persecution generally, and with the mention of the prophets, an attempt to silence God's voice, calling them to repent and believe and act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with him. But more than that, it isn't just God's people and prophets who are slaughtered for the sake of a good meal or the best coffee or chocolate, but kept in poverty for the sake of overabundant comfort of other people in a faraway country. It's in fact all people who've been slaughtered on the earth. The responsibility for the death of countless people lies at the door of the rich, immoral nations whose only desire was to increase worldly wealth and comfort. Bringing us right up to date, vaccine nationalism is part of this evil. And God will one day bring judgment on all who refuse to repent of their sin and acknowledge Jesus Christ as the true King, and come broken and humble to Jesus and be astounded at his forgiveness and grace and welcome, and then live that out in the spheres of influence that they have. The plagues and disasters that we've seen in different parts of Revelation are, as we said when we came across them, not meant for destruction, but to rouse the attention of a sinful people and call them to repent and believe the gospel. For that is God's heart, to redeem and to restore and to heal and to forgive. That option's still open for you. But the people refused and cursed God instead. Now we see the consequences described here in chapter 18. Utter destruction of all evil and sin. The death of all that leads to death. And the death in the end of death itself.